So hi everybody, I'm Francesca Tarocco from Ca' Foscari. I'm a historian of religion and culture, an intellectual historian of China, and I'm delighted to introduce today two of my friends and colleagues, Daniele Brombal, who's an associate professor at the Department of Asian and North African Studies at Ca' Foscari, University of Venice, and his collaborator, Angela Moriggi, who's working at the Natural Resources Institute in Finland, LUC. Their paper is very interesting for us. The Belt and Road Initiative has rivers of ink have been poured on describing it in Chinese, of course, and in many other languages. It has inspired research projects, grants, a lot of conflicts and criticisms, as well as endorsements, of course. And Daniele and Angela have a very interesting way to go about this, so I think they will keep us entertained. So my suggestion is that we have a few comments perhaps right after the paper, and then we open it to the floor. Thank you, Daniele and Angela.
Thank you, Francesca, for your introduction, and welcome everybody. Our session today is going to focus on transdisciplinary communities and the way they can sustain change and transformation in socio-ecological terms. And we will do this by making reference to a concrete case relevant to the Belt and Road Initiative. So as Francesca was just telling you, I am associate professor at Ca' Foscari University, Venice. I'm part of the Center for Marco Polo Center for Global Europe-Asia Connections. And I will deliver this presentation together with Angela, who is working at Natural Resources Institute, Finland, LUC, and she's also part of a Marie Curie project, SAS-Place, bringing together different sustainability researchers from different angles and different perspectives. The presentation will touch upon four main points. So I will start by introducing and giving a little bit of background about the Belt and Road Initiative and the way it is a very complex thing and bringing into play different dimensions. So I will try to share a little bit of basic information about that. Then we'll move on to share with you what the potential of transdisciplinary communities can be in order to also to approach the study of the Belt and Road from a socio-ecological perspective. Then Angela will take care of the third point. She will introduce to you more in detail the theoretical and especially the methodological aspects of the experiment we have conducted to establish a transdisciplinary community. And then I will share the results of our experiment, together with a few final reflections, also looking a little bit ahead in the future and coming from our community. So starting from the Belt and Road. The Belt and Road is a big initiative which was launched by the highest Chinese leadership in 2013, between 2013 and 14. Basically, it is a huge infrastructural and economic initiative which aims at establishing different infrastructural and economic corridors throughout Eurasia, and then also across Southeast Asia and in Eastern Africa. This is mostly through land routes, but there is also a sea route, which you can see here in this shade of blue. The declared objective of this initiative, which is backed by China and mostly funded by China, even though not only by China, is to promote material growth across Eurasia, having China as the epicenter, in a way, of this growth. And this is increasingly linked to this narrative of a new phase of globalization, in the fourth stage of globalization after the first one, coming from the colonial powers, the Spanish and the Portuguese, and then the British, US, and then the idea that the new phase of globalization will be led by China. And this is done by means of infrastructures, as I was telling you, with huge investments, which are estimated for the next 50 years. And infrastructure are mostly linear infrastructures, meaning railroads, roads, energy transportation lines, pipelines, and also energy plants. In particular, dams, so hydraulic infrastructures. That's also a big part in the portfolio of the Belt and Road projects. And this initiative is being seen by most of the community of political scientists, basically, as a game changer, both in terms of geopolitical relationship as well as the economy across Eurasia. However, when you bring this Belt and Road initiative into the realm of environmental aspects and socio-ecological interaction, you would see that this is not really a game changer. If anything, it sort of replicates patterns of development which have already caused the huge environmental crisis we are living in, basically. And there is an increasing scientific consensus on this. This is just one of the most important papers which have been published in the last couple of years on this, showing how the different routes intersect with biodiversity areas, which are very important across Eurasia. And to sum up, you can, just to make you understand what are the impacts of this initiative, we can divide them into impacts into the biosphere, so the life on Earth. It's going to cause huge loss in terms of habitats and therefore biodiversity loss. Issues also in terms of soil pollution and erosion, leading to desertification. A lot of areas crossed by these lines are actually arid areas in inner Asia. Pollution and habitat loss also for water. And then, of course, air pollution and greenhouse gases emissions, not only due to the increased transportation across these routes, but most importantly because of the emissions, for all the concrete and the steel, which is actually needed to build this stuff. And that is really much carbon intensive, so causes a huge amount of greenhouse gases emissions. Then there is also a dimension which is biocultural. So it relates to the marginalization of indigenous communities, which is already ongoing, of course, all across the world, but in these areas is going to be pretty strong. Environmental injustice, and then the disruption of all the cultural attributes we give to the environment surrounding us. Destruction of landscapes, sense of place, and so on and so forth. So to sum up, the Belt and Road is actually a very important chance to look into and reflect on the challenges which human civilization is basically facing nowadays. And it is a very good example of how often humans tend to have, we tend to have this gap between what we know, and we know that all these patterns of development is destroying the planet, basically, well, not the planet, but the possibility for us to live on this planet, and what we actually do as a species, which very often is replicate past patterns without being able to use in the most effective way the knowledge we have. Of course, to trigger this reflection and sustain over time this kind of reflection, you need basically, well, two things. A lot of critical thinking, which means also being able to understand how these different aspects, economic, social, environmental, are linked to each other. And then also collaboration across and with different skills and competencies, but also with different stakeholders and right holders as well across these lines. So when we started working on this, we thought that, well, the idea of establishing a transdisciplinary community to engage with the Belt and Road initiative and this reflection was the right way to go. Our transdisciplinary community has different attributes. Here I try to just sum up the most important of them. First of all, a transdisciplinary community is very much responsive to societal challenges. especially those which are very complex and uncertain as well. So responsiveness is one key feature of this. It is also inclusive. There are no predefined boundaries between disciplines within an idea of transdisciplinary community and the practice of transdisciplinary community. And actually, they also embrace the contribution from practitioners and lay people alike. Also, another very important aspect is that these communities sort of reject this idea of neutrality, because knowledge is always positional. It is always generated based on the context you are working in, the people you relate with, and also the cultural background you were brought up, basically. And finally, transdisciplinary communities are ethical, meaning that they're not instrumental to reaching one goal, but they are rather based on common values and a common commitments and a shared vision of the future. So what we tried to do was to establish our own transdisciplinary community related to the Belt and Road through a study retreat in a forest, which is in the Italian Alps, very close to my hometown, last year in September. We brought a group of 6 practitioners and scientists from different backgrounds. There was one anthropologist and ecologist, one conservationist, one historian of architecture, one architect, and one environmental lawyer, and then one sinologist, and myself. And the main goal was to establish a transdisciplinary community to foster a different socio-ecological vision of the Belt and Road Initiative. And the outcomes we foreseen were basically 2. So first one, getting to know each other better, and then lay down a charter of values, sort of crystallizing our views on this issue. To do this, we needed a very structured approach, because this is not something, not something you do often in academia. And so I asked for the help of Angela, who designed the process we then went through in this retreat. You cannot see her in the picture because unfortunately then she had to go back to Finland. But we have been already experimenting with these things in Venice, and this was a perfect setting to use these kind of approaches. So I will now leave the floor to Angela, and since I'm going to have to keep the presentation, Angela, you can just tell me when you want to just shift the slide, and I can do that for you.
Yes, thank you, Daniele, and thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. When Daniele asked me to help him design the activities for his study retreat, I became immediately interested because the principles and objectives of his retreat are very much in line with the way I work as a facilitator, which is something I do both in my work as an academic, but also outside academia. A facilitator is someone that helps groups to foster collective processes of learning and collaboration towards desired change. And the picture I put there below kind of exemplifies how this change happens. This change that happens taking into account different dimensions, both the individual, his own values, visions, knowledge, perspectives, opinions, but also the way the individual relates to different other stakeholders he's working with, as well as the communities in which he's embedded, as well as the global issues that kind of influence his or her work. This work as a facilitator has also been channeled into a project which was then published as a toolkit of creative methods, which you can find online. It's totally free from download. It's called Arts-Based Methods for Transformative Engagement. And the idea of this toolkit would be that it could be used in different contexts in which people would be willing to engage in change, or they would be already change makers that wanted to enhance and empower themselves even more with a certain kind of methods. You can move to the next slide. Thank you. So one major concept behind our toolkit and our way of working is Theory U. Theory U is an approach, a framework for process facilitation, which has been designed by Otto Scharmer at MIT Institute in Boston, which has been used for decades in a lot of different settings with a lot of different groups, mostly for organizational change and management in business, in government, in NGOs, and in academia. And it's quite a complex framework to understand, but what I would like to share with you today are 2 points. First, that theory U in a way disrupts the way we work as academic, especially in the sustainability field, when we approach an issue, which is basically a problem-solving attitude. We start from a gap, from an issue we want to challenge, contribute to, or solve, and we go straight to a solution in a very linear way, oftentimes only usually using certain kinds of understanding and cognitive dimensions. Theory U changes that. It starts from the present, also looking at past patterns, trying to understand the present from different perspectives, with different kinds of cognitive understandings, which also engage the emotional and ethical sphere. And that's why the U goes down, because it kind of connects to your guts and not just to your head. It also does another important thing, which is that through a certain number of techniques, it tries to look at things from a totally different perspective and change habituated ways of thinking, habituated patterns of thinking, and drawing and departing from those. Then it leads to a process of planning, actions, and visions for the future. Now, you can use theory U in very different ways. It can last an hour, 2 hours, 3 days, 3 years, depending on the process that you want to implement. But what you need to do is that you need to also design a number of techniques which will then be implemented in the different stages of the U. So for the case of the study retreat, as you can see in the next slide, together with Daniele, we decided to resort mainly to creative methods, which I had been testing in my work and which proved very effective. Of course, one can use a combination of creative methods together with more systemic, analytical ways of working together, but this was particularly appropriate for the setting and for the duration of the study retreat. And I'm just going to mention a few methods just to give you a taste of the kind of things that were in a way triggered during the process. First of all, they used the Dixit cards, which are just a very simple board game which you can buy at any store, which I found very useful in moments of getting to know each other at the beginning of a meeting or of a project, when you want to introduce each other in a little bit less formal way, in a more playful and evocative way. And so these cards are particularly helpful for that. Secondly, they also engaged into an introspective walk. Rancilio Forest, with his silence and his power for contemplation, was the perfect setting to go on a silent walk with the help of a nature guide, to try and connect with one's own values and wishes. And finally, another method that proved particularly useful is Vision 3, which I painted myself, inspired by an approach called appreciative inquiry, which is also a very established way of working, especially in the development cooperation settings, but also in organizational management and change, which is just a clustering and crystallizing method in which you come up with a certain number of goals in a very nice and, again, evocative way. These are just some examples, but the method, besides for trying to foster a collaborative atmosphere on different dimensions, there was another very important goal that Daniele had in mind for the study retreat, which you can see in the next slide, and which again is very much in line with how theory works. So how the processes of facilitation I lead usually work, and which the idea of changing paradigms, of trying to disrupt the way we think usually, which is not necessarily a radical change of mindset, but is oftentimes just a way to tap into things that we already have, but that we don't have the guts or the voice to express. And in particular, what we do, because we are sustainability scientists, as is I am, so I have also quite normative orientation in the work I do, is to try and evoke sustainability mindsets. In particular, trying to move away from a paradigm, which is the one that dominates our Earth, which is an ecological paradigm, mostly based on a patriarchal societies that are power-seeking, that are telling us that we are all autonomous beings that don't depend on each other, and that are delusional, in which we just keep growing and growing and destroying all our resources. And we try to move from that towards a different kind of paradigm, which is an ecological one, where we are all interdependent and interconnected as we actually are, and where we try to see ourselves as human beings who are not only just destroying the planet or trying to minimize harm and impact, but we are actually capable of compassionate and regenerative acts towards each other and towards the ecosystem. So how do you do these, which may sound so abstract? Well, there are a lot of different ways to do that, but one very effective method, which may sound quite childish to you, but it actually always proves very effective in combination with other techniques, and you'll see it in the next slide, is called headlines from the future. It's a way of imagining the future, let's say 20 years from now, writing a letter or a headline of a magazine. In this case, the magazine was called Silk Road Daily 2039. But instead of describing what's happening in 20 years, what you see, what has changed from the perspective of your own, the game here is to try and think from a perspective of another being, perhaps an animal, a bird, even a building, an infrastructure that is in the place that you're trying to describe, which affects your work or where you're working. And this was particularly helpful in doing the trick of changing mindsets about the future. And together with the other methods and some other techniques, which I didn't mention, it led to the very important objectives of the retreat in the next slide, which is the drafting of the Charter of Values, a declaration called the Consiglio Declaration, taken from the forest in which the retreat happened, advancing a common Charter of Values for the mutual benefit and well-being of living communities along the new Silk Roads. And this declaration was, in a way, it kind of manifested and brought together all these different things that emerged through the process. And it was also presented at a public event which took place in Venice at the university just after the study retreat was over. And Daniele will tell you a little bit more about this, and I'll pass again the voice to him.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Angela. So I'm just going to go briefly into the results of these experiments. So you may remember that at the beginning, when we set our goal for the transdisciplinary community, the idea was to foster different socio-ecological visions of the Belt and Road Initiative. And what happened through this process, which Angela just described, was that actually we, at the end of the retreat, we were actually framing the Belt and Road in ways which were very much different from the ones we were reproducing in a way at the beginning. When we first got to the forest, each of the participants was basically replicating the themes and the contents and approaches of the dominant debate of the Belt and Road Initiative, especially reflecting that interest in geopolitics, the economy, and so on and so forth. Through the process, all of that was sort of abandoned, and we got into a much deeper reflection on socio-ecological aspects of the Belt and Road. And this shift took place, as Angela also was mentioning, during the walk and the meditation in the forest, and became then apparent through the headlines from the future exercise, which Angela was just explaining. One important thing is that these new visions we were sort of projecting of the Belt and Road Initiative were given voice to ethical values. And through this process, we felt enabled to express these ethical values based on shared responsibility. This is a very important thing, because very often in the academia especially, you don't feel empowered to do that. You always think that this dimension should be sort of kept aside because it is not relevant. So all this process was actually able to empower us to do so. And the Vision Tree exercise was extremely helpful in this respect. All of these aspects you can actually see in our declaration. I'm not going to go through that into detail. You can find that online. But I want to just touch upon a few important aspects of this. The first one is that when we drafted the declaration, and you can find it right at the beginning, we did that out of sense of belonging to living communities along this Belt and Road Initiative. So we try to put together our role as practitioners and also academics, as well as living entities and citizens as well. so with a sense of responsibility. Another thing which emerged very clearly was the rejection of the idea that biological and cultural diversity can be monetized, and so recognizing the intrinsic value of these things. The role of coexistence and the importance of coexistence was there too, and the core aspect of caring and temperance as well. So not only limiting our footprint basically on the planet, but also having caring and regenerative attitudes, also through our daily work. All of this, of course, is very much thick in terms of values, but the next step, which we resolved to move towards after we went back home, basically, each of us, was to translate this into practical things. So actually the community which was established there is still evolving and expanding, I have to say. And we are working together in order to translate this core set of values into actual projects and programs about the Belt and Road Initiative. Right, that's all from me now. I think our 25 minutes are up, but of course we are open to receiving your comments, first of all right now, and then also through email if you think it can be useful for you.
Thank you, Daniele and Angela, for this wonderful presentation. And I love the picture there that reminds us where we could actually be all happily together as part of a living community, rather than in this digital bubble. Yeah, many things. Just a thought. You don't mention the digital aspect of the BRI. Is that something you do on purpose? Or, I mean, it seems to me that that's one of the main aspects of it. And partly this is, of course, China's push to sort of normalize a particular understanding of, global digital cooperation with Chinese characteristics. And it shows, I think, also that the US and Europe are lagging behind very often and China has been very successful on the other hand in kind of nurturing particular, specific modes of local innovation. Mm-hmm. So both things. I have many other questions, but I think we want to open the floor.
Do you want me to reply to this right now, or
perhaps we can take a few more questions and then
okay,
you can,
sure.
Yeah. I don't know if I see the chat.
I may try also to, but I have to exit the presentation.
I think Professor Casanova is raising his hand.
Okay. I don't see that. Maybe Sophia can do that.
Perhaps Sophia can help you here, because
yeah,
if I may, thank you very much for this very interesting project. I really think that it is of great relevance. One of the things which I also found missing was the relevance of the historical Silk Road and what was it that made it so unique. It was a large territory without territorial hegemony by any power, by any religion. It was a place of intercultural encounter where the great civilizations of India and China and Persia interacted culturally. It was the place through which Buddhism entered China and then Chinese Buddhism expanded. It was the way in which Manichaeism from Persia for centuries was the religion of the Silk Road. Then the Syria Christianity from the 3rd to the 13th century. This was the greatest area in global humanity in which precisely the greatest civilizations interacted together with one another without hegemony. Until, of course, by the 13th, 14th century, Islam had taken over. And the reason I'm asking this is because Xinjiang in China, and of course in the Uyghurs, play a crucial role as one of the key cultural people, precisely being the mediators in these communications. But we see what happens when you have a hegemonic power, you wanting to use the Silk Road for its own global hegemony, and precisely the time when they are simply repressing the culture of the Uyghurs. So I think that those are very, very important aspects that have to be taken into account. And we cannot talk of the Silk Road simply as if this would be a naive initiative that started right now without connection to the past.
Of course, I'm sure that Daniele and Angela have very clear that the Silk Road is very many things and not simply an infrastructure project, and that that the power of the Silk Road is also based around narratives and constructions of the past, as much as you say.
No, but my point is that if we only look at this as socio-ecological and not socio-cultural project, a truly intercultural project is what made the Silk Road unique. That was my point.
Right. Any more questions?
There's some written questions.
I see.
Which I can read out if you'd like.
He's raising his hand.
I see Dr. Calhoun also raising his hand.
Okay. Sorry. So there's a written question from one of the students who asks, thank you for your presentation. Sorry, this is Emanuele Argitto, who says, thank you for your presentation. I'd like to know what is the impact the project had so far on policymakers involved in BRI? Did you have the possibility to discuss it with some of the stakeholders?
Sophia, perhaps
yes.
You can also read the other ones.
Yeah, okay. And then
so he gets then back to us.
Then says, this is from Emanuel Schlichter, says, I find particularly interesting the transformation of the ego logic to eco logic. How can this be scaled nationwide, and what would the role of media be? And then Salom asks, what is the connection between this socio-political, ecological, mystical project and the theme of the conference?
All right, so can we just...
Sorry, there's one more question by...
No?
Oh, yes, that's right.
At the very first one.
Oh, yeah, that slipped out. So it says, the coronavirus pandemic forced us to renew the relationship with the environment and the society. But the question is, how can we do this behavior and persuade the industrial powers towards change and reconciliation with the environment?
Sophia, Craig is trying to also get a question.
Yes, sorry, go ahead, Craig, if you can. I can't, unfortunately, we've had a bit of a technical problem with the YouTube live stream, so I've handed over control to Marco, and so Marco needs to promote Craig. I'm terribly sorry about this.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
You are.
I'm tempted to say Daniele and Angela should have a chance to answer so many questions before I ask one more. It's partly different, partly connected. First, thanks for a terrific presentation on a really interesting project. I want to ask about, if you will, the mode of practice of the project, which you both talked about. First, Daniele as interdisciplinary, but then Angela in terms of a different kind of facilitation of discussion. So your presentation combined various aspects of, if you will, content about the Silk Road Initiative, about BRI and so forth, but also form and the way of doing this. And I want to ask about that and connect it also to other comments. This is a kind of mode of academic practice that is being suggested. It's very much in common with things like John Dewey's idea about publics, and publics will form, and intellectuals will provide input but not dominate completely these publics. What I want to ask about is how you see the relationship between this mode of public academic practice and the rest of what universities do. So universities have people who are studying the history of the Silk Road and the different cultures, their interactions in other methodologies and other ways, as Jose was reminding us. How do you relate that? I mean, this is also, you know, sustainability scientists includes people who are doing technical work in atmospheric science or something, the oceanography, whatever. What are the ways in which the connections are forged between the rest of academic work and this mode of academic practice, which is very exciting as a version of public science, it seems to me?
Yeah, perhaps we can start from this very last question, which I think touches, you know, some of the most, it really goes at the heart of your project, Angela and Daniele.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, Angela, would you, probably this relates also to mode 2 science. So maybe you could just say a few words and then I can bring this into more practical aspects of what we are trying to do with the Belt and Road. What do you think?
Yes, I can say a couple of things about this, and I can also touch upon a couple of insights about the environmental issues that were mentioned in the questions, and then you can continue with all the other questions. So, I mean, we could open up a Pandora vase about academic modes of working, right? That's a topic that is extremely dear to me. And it's one of the reasons why I began doing this work of facilitation, because I was very saturated with a kind of academia which was talking and not doing, or a kind of academia which was talking in a way and then doing in another way. So for me, this mismatch between what you propose or what you praise, how do you say, in a way, and claim you believe in, and then a different practical approach also within each other, you know, in our academic community, was very frustrating. So I believe that there's huge potential to combine different ways of doing academia. My own way is an action-oriented one. So it's purposely aimed at changing things. It's participatory, it engages always stakeholders, people in very different ways. But we don't have all to do the same thing, not at all, absolutely. We need the people who take totally different approaches, but we also have to come together and facilitate dialogues amongst each other. And I truly believe that these processes can absolutely bring together these different perspectives and like make us understand our commonalities at a more deeper level, because oftentimes the normal way of working in academia kind of reiterates a very superficial way, and then it just, in a way, makes us believe that we are so different because of our different disciplinary backgrounds, because of our different methodologies, because of conceptual, you know, ways in which we are stuck, and we just, you know, don't try to be flexible and play around with it. On the other hand, it's also very difficult to do this because the academic system perpetuates a very old way of doing academia and rewards an old way of doing academia, one which is only based about publishing, for instance. And therefore, we also need to change the system deeply if we really want to engage in these conversations and empower those who do action-oriented work and those who don't. So that's what I believe. Secondly, I think this also links to some of the questions related to how can we scale this up? Because obviously, you know, many times when introducing theory U and these kind of approaches, one is like, okay, but you're talking about individual change, but we need system change, we need governance to change, we need big corporations to change. That's totally true. The thing is that many times we've been so focused on pointing at these big powers that we have forgotten what we can do as individuals, as academics, as communities of practice. And the power of communities to scale up and trigger different narratives is really big when you do that. I mean, look at the case of Greta Thunberg and these young activists. So in a way, I'm not saying that we should not think about the bigger picture. In fact, most of the methods we use are systemic methods. So they always try to see all the connections between different things in a very holistic way. But this doesn't mean dismissing our role as everyday citizens and as professionals. So that's how I see it. It's also based on a lot of theories which are coming from the leverage, the theories of leverage points, which was designed by Donella Meadows many years ago, which says that many times values and belief systems and mindsets are the very most important leverage point, but they are at the very bottom of the iceberg, and we just focus on what's at the top layer, forgetting all that, and thus perpetuating the same behaviors over and over. And I finally will say another point about the question about the role of the media in this. Well, the media is extremely important because it does help us to change narratives. And think about, for instance, the narrative about coronavirus that was constantly said over and over and over again by politicians, by journalists, and by a lot of people, that we were fighting a war, that a virus was just something foreign and away from us that we were fighting against in a battle. This way of understanding things, for me, it doesn't create unity. It just creates, again, misconceptions about the fact that we have not created this. We have created this pandemic with our own behaviors, going to destroy ecosystems where we should have left the way they were. And the way to change this is not through a battling attitude, but through a caring one. Look at the importance of our health care system. Look at the importance of communities getting together online. Look at the importance of everything interconnected. So the narrative here needs to change again from a power struggle and battling towards interdependence and changing together. That's what I believe in. Maybe Daniele can continue.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think this, I mean, one important thing to me, sorry, but I had some problem with my screen, so I was trying to solve this, is the point of system thinking also, which Angela was raising, and which is very important to me. So the idea that to generate change, you have to dig deep into values of people, and you need also as in academy also you need to have ways to do this properly, and then translate this into action. Of course, my background is not entirely in the academy. I was working in development cooperation for quite a few years, and so my first training in research was actually done in that setting. I was working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy. So I was basically trained in order thinking about concrete issues to solve, and then trying to make the best possible use of different competencies. And so when I came across this kind of approaches, well, then I thought, this is it. I mean, this is what we need to do. So it is also relates to what, in my case, to what I was doing in the past, in my first, let's say, in the first part of my career, I would say. There are also, I think also Angela was to some extent also replying to the question about the pandemic and the way this relates to the work we are doing. And there are also a lot of other questions. Can I ask first how much time we have left, so I can try to organize a little bit of time? To Sophia, maybe. Do we have 15 minutes, or am I mistaken?
Sorry. So we're a bit over time, but
say 10 minutes, Sophia.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So there were so many. I will just try to go through them as quick as I can. I will just start from the first one: digital aspects, which was raised by Francesca. We're not taking into account that much digital aspects here because they are not there when it comes to impacts on the environment. So when we focused on these aspects, of course, the infrastructural thing, they have much stronger impact. And those are the things you reflect the most in this case. Of course, at the same time, the digital Belt and Road is also something we are exploring, myself and other people who took part into the retreat, because there are different groups in Mongolia, in China, in other countries, who are using the digital Belt and Road in order to build a network of information about the state of the environment. And not only the state of the environment, but to some extent also the state of indigenous peoples and local communities playing a role as custodian of the environment. So it is certainly relevant and very important. About the old history of the Silk Road, of course, we are aware of that. I'm not entirely sure that it was never about hegemony. I mean, the Silk Roads, if you think from the perspective of Venice, and the very travel of Marco Polo were possible thanks to the Pax Mongolica. So without the Mongol rule, would that be impossible to have that very important, let's say, chapter of the Silk Roads, which is still very much used symbolically, but on both ends of the Silk Road. It is sort of epitomizing this thing, both in China and in Italy. Then, of course, yes, all this history, which was a lot about dialogue, it was a lot about interconnection and so on and so forth, is being used instrumentally by political power in China. And that's a huge issue. They're doing this also with other aspects. I also have to sort of I'm not really sure that, well, I'm not at all sure that culture can be separated from socio-ecological aspects. I think actually it's the other way around. Socio-ecological aspects are embedded and are, deeply rooted, socio-ecological interaction are deeply rooted into cultural things. This is very important for somebody working in area studies, because by being aware of this, you give importance to the context. The socio-ecological relations are shaped by context, which is cultural and environmental at the same time. So this is a very important thing for me. Probably this was not stated clearly in the presentation, but it's truly important in this respect. Which leads me to another of the question about what's with all this mystical thing. Well, mystic is very important in culture, and the mystic of nature is one of the major things which help us in trying to reflect on our relationship with nature. This is very deep in many religious traditions. I can talk about the one which I know most, which is, even though I am an atheist, I was brought up in a boarding school, in a Catholic boarding school, and the current Pope is named Francis. And Francis was an important saint, which was, using a lot of mystical techniques, and is still remembered for the idea of coexistence in nature. And this example you can do in many, many different cases. So it's very important, actually. I would say more important than many things. And this is very important, especially to translate transformation from, from an individual level to a broader level. So there was the question about scaling up to nationwide transformation. This is very important. It all starts from it not all starts, but the individuals play a very important role. So I truly believe that transformation should start from individuals and small communities, and then it can trigger bigger change. Of course, structural conditions of political relations, economy are very important, and very often they are sort of, imposing a huge burden on us. But in any case, we have to do. If you are committed to this, individual change is very important as well. And trying to translate that into the work you do every day, especially for somebody working in the academy, is very important. We try to engage other stakeholders. Actually, we are doing that right now for a big project, trying to value the role of indigenous communities and local communities along the Silk Roads, which we have to submit actually next week with also a couple of people who were there in the retreat. It is not that easy because very often when you engage with people having responsibility positions in both in states and big corporations, they tend to have a very closed mind and even a closer heart, I would say. And it's very difficult also to have that time, which is a critical factor when you have to actually to try to think about stuff with people. So you have to be very careful in who you want to take on board, and being able to understand the reactions when you are approaching them. And you know, with time, we managed to have on board quite a few influential people from, you know, United Nations and other people who are now trying to help us in building bigger projects and more, you know, hands-on and practical projects based on that kind of core values we identified. So it is a working process. I'm optimistic, but it's very difficult, of course, to engage certain kinds of stakeholders. And that's it, I think, more or less. I tried to touch upon very, very briefly on all these points, but then of course, we are, you know, it is totally okay if you want to share more also through the email or whatever, unless we have more time. But I think we are out of time, right?
Yeah, I think we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
everybody. Yeah, I'm sure we can continue this conversation elsewhere, perhaps over email as suggested, and exchange more materials. By the way, the Silk Road, just to reply to Jose, I'm sure you know that, is as much an invention and a constant reinvention as this BRI initiative is, right? There hasn't ever been historically one Silk Road that ever was involved the great civilizations as you proposed. Yeah. You know that. Yeah. Okay, thank you everybody, and we have now a panel, I believe.
Yes, we do. If it's okay with everyone, I would like to ask for a 10-minute break while we deal with some of the technical issues, and also to allow everyone to have a coffee, some water, etc. Get ready for the next panel.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you in 10 minutes. Thank you, Daniele. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Volker. Thank you. Thank you, Angela and Francesca as well, and Sofia. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Francesca.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you are. Now, how do these work?